Hello and welcome to this Institute for Strategic Leadership Business Forum. I'm Andrew Patterson. To support leaders as we navigate these unprecedented times, ISL has created this weekly Leaders Forum. We want to provide a community of learning where panelists share their experience and insights as we move from business as usual to leadership in a crisis. This week we're focusing on the essential services to discuss how they've adapted their leadership style to this new operating paradigm and what they're noticing about the challenges and opportunities of an integrated whole of government approach to tackling the pandemic. So let's introduce our three panelists joining us today. Firstly, Andy Costa is the newly appointed New Zealand Police Commissioner. His police career spans more than 20 years. There's a strong history of accomplishments following his graduation from Police College in 1997, including serving in the front line and investigative roles and numerous other senior leadership roles within the New Zealand Police. A former lawyer in the Office of the Crown Solicitor in Auckland, Andy was seconded to the Ministry of Justice as Deputy Chief Executive in 2016. Andy, welcome, Commissioner, welcome to you. Susan Middleditch is currently Deputy Secretary, Corporate and Regulatory Services with the Victoria Police based in Melbourne, an accomplished executive and respected leader. Susan has previously held roles as Executive Director of Corporate Services at the Department of Premier and Cabinet and CEO of Health Support Queensland. Susan, welcome to you joining us from Australia. And John Wadsworth is the CEO of the Institute for Strategic Leadership. John joined ISL in 2018 after holding a CEO and Executive Dean's roles as well as several national board roles. Thank you all for your time today. We're obviously living through unprecedented times right now, and yet through such shocks, it's obviously causing us to all work and engage differently. I wonder if we could begin perhaps by just getting a sense from each of you about how you've moved and shifted the paradigm from business as usual to crisis and leadership, what that shift has involved, particularly from a leadership perspective, and I guess how you're dealing with this personally. Andy, perhaps first to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, for us, it's been an opportunity to really focus on what's important. It's tempting to want to throw out everything that we normally think about and focus on the crisis. So what are the things about the way we need to be as leaders that we want to emphasise even more at the moment? And for us, it's been about a calm, confident, compassionate approach to policing. We've used those words repeatedly just to get our frontline thinking about the style of policing we want to have. And that's also resonated in terms of our leadership. The next one is about how we devolve our leadership when we cannot afford to digest the massive volume of things happening at the centre. So real clarity of purpose, real clarity of intent, and then asking our senior leaders to step up and make it happen for us across the different parts of our business. That's worked incredibly well. What we have seen is just a calm execution, and it's, I think, further embedded good leadership in terms of the way our people are working.
Thanks, Andy. Susan, your thoughts?
Sure, Andrew. I think there's probably two factors for me in this. There's my role in responding to and supporting the needs of Victoria Police and the state government more broadly, but also a leadership role for me in terms of our own business continuity. And certainly what that has meant over the last few weeks is moving a very large proportion of our workforce to working from home. And what that has meant is that, we need to do things very quickly, almost spin on a dime. It can mean that we've had to do things more than once because as restrictions have changed, we've had to change our policy positions and also doing things totally differently to the way that we've done before. I guess in terms of leadership approaches and my leadership approach in particular, I think what I found is that I have had to be more directive than what I would ordinarily be. The time for collaboration just isn't presenting itself at present. It also means that we're very much focused on the here and now. So, in ISL terminology, I'm a red character. I love the strategy. I'm always looking, out into the future. That's not appropriate or available to me at present. So it's very much around now. But in saying that, I still do try and ponder at least the what's next, even if the what's next is into next week. So, you know, that's certainly, you know, me, I guess, working out of my normal natural leadership style.
I guess the challenge for you, Susan, has been the immediacy of this, because decisions have to be made. You don't get the luxury of having time to think about them for a while. How's that changed your leadership style as well?
For me, I'm actually a fairly decisive leader anyway. I do have an approach where I think that any decision is a good decision, even though, you know, tomorrow or the next day you may have to make another decision because you've got more information. So the making decisions, you know, on the fly is something that arguably I do fairly well and fairly naturally. But normally, whereas, you know, I would, you know, get the groups of people together and come up with ideas and really try and get the best solution that we could possibly get. It does mean that we have had, or I've had to realize, but also I've had to communicate to my team that we're not going to get 100% on every single decision and everything we do, and that's okay. You know, 80% for today is good. If we get 100% tomorrow or the next day, brilliant. But today, 80% is okay.
And is that how you characterise your leadership? Because as Commissioner of Police, I mean, you have to be the most decisive person in the country, almost, perhaps second only to the Prime Minister. Is that your natural operating style? And particularly, you know, in a crisis environment where you don't know everything, and yet there's this expectation that you are expected to, and you will make those decisions accordingly.
Yeah, it's really interesting situation. So you do need to be decisive, but in policing, most of the decisions are made at the front line. When you think about, are we going to arrest? Are we going to warn? Are we going to educate? So as much as anything, it's actually about the tone that you set for all of the other people making decisions. Sure, there are some big decisions to take, but I think the biggest decision you take as a leader in a large organisation is, what is the tone? What is the intent that I'm setting for people? Because I don't have time for a lot of conversations. I've got to trust and enable them to do the right thing out there.
John, your thoughts, and I guess particularly some of the challenges you've seen between, you know, these two very different sectors, you know, the private sector and the public sector.
Yeah, well, things that are common to both is that you know, in a crisis, people are looking and need trust, compassion, stability, and hope. And so we're seeing leaders definitely becoming more directive than they might ordinarily be, certainly paying attention to people's well-being, and also communicating very openly and regularly to their teams. But there are some differences we're seeing between essential and non-essential. The essential workers right now are definitely reporting they're going the extra mile more. They're more inspired. They're suggesting ideas for improvement. They've got a greater sense of belonging and are more productive. But there's some early signs that their mojo might be taking a bit of a hit, and they certainly have a high need for sort of appreciation, being valued and recognised for the effort they're putting in. Whereas the non-essential leaders are very much focused and needing clarity of direction. Times are a lot more uncertain in the current context for them, and you know, they're really getting clarity around the understanding of the working from home. So some similarities in terms of leadership style, but certainly some differences in terms of the engagement and what they're looking for from leaders.
Thanks, John. A couple of areas I'm particularly interested to drill down into this idea of, you know, priorities. You know, how do you determine priorities in your environment, and also your own self-care, which is important because obviously you need to manage yourself through as leaders. How are you addressing those two areas? Susan, perhaps first to you.
Sure, Andrew. I think priorities is about what's happening today. And for us, it is a day-to-day proposition in terms of what the priority is, because the state government and Victoria Police, depending on what decisions they make the night before, will change our priorities for today. And that's been really interesting as a leader of a large corporate services area, because normally our priorities are fairly set in terms of regulatory timeframes. And I've had to say to my team, they're not our priorities for now, and that's okay that that's not our priorities for now. We really need to focus on what it is that Victoria Police needs from us today, and potentially have a think about what they might need from us tomorrow, but really that could change tomorrow as well. So, for me, it's about clearly articulating what the priority is that the organisation is wanting and needing from us. As John said, making sure that, my people are coping. And for me, again, there is a personal priority that I know what is actually happening across Victoria Police as a whole, but also the state government as a whole, because my role is definitely that conduit, and I need to be able to share information both ways through that continuum to make sure that we're managing this as much as we possibly can.
Andy, you would normally have the luxury of maybe 100 days to overview the organisation and then sort of determine your priorities. But you've been sort of thrown into this. How are you dealing with the priorities and the self-care issues?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We've got a vision that New Zealand should be the safest country. So at that level, the priority is completely consistent and the same. What's important now to achieve that is, as Susan says, much more into that compressed sort of time cycle. Coming into this role, I obviously, before this all happened, had a vision about how I might roll it out. Now I'm really looking at this situation and going, how do we need to operate in this situation to move towards the future that I envisage? So it's using every interaction, every meeting, every direction setting piece to say, what's important for the future and how do we do the now with an eye to that? I think the other part of it is early on we recognised that we might not be able to maintain the full suite of policing services if our workforce was really hit. And so we did an activity where we just said, right, what would you turn off first? How would you do it safely? So we've given that direction to commanders. So even at a local level, they know what's important for core policing service delivery. In terms of my sort of personal resilience, I'm doing fine. The thing that has dropped off for me has been the exercise. Because the gym's closed, I can't do what I love to do. I haven't quite replaced that with a new routine, but just recognising it's so important to check in, and I'm doing that a lot with my own team, just to say, how are you going? Sometimes you have to push people out the door, either literally or figuratively, to say, hey, look, have a day off and just let's get into a sustainable rhythm. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
John, what have been some of your observations around priorities and self-care?
Yeah, certainly the priorities are focused on here and now. But, as Andy sort of touched on, what are the things that can be done now? What's the culture? What's the way that leaders are engaging that sets the tone for the future? That's going to stand organisations in really good stead. But certainly in terms of the self-care, even the most disciplined leaders have thrown their routines out the window for now, and exercise and balance has taken a back seat, arguably at a time that it's most important. So, yeah, this is going to be in the long haul. You can only run on adrenaline for so long, and I think most have been over this, the last 2 or 3 weeks, as this has really evolved. So, certainly something that leaders need to turn their attention to is in the reality of the current context, what are some of the things that they can do that they find refreshing? That'll be different for everybody. For some, it'll be walks. For some, it could be just being really truly present around the dinner table and not having work ticking over in the background. For others, might be some micro breaks in the sun, or going for a run, whatever it might be. Critical right now, because exhaustion can really creep up on you, and generally speaking, others will notice before you do. So even having people around you who are willing to give some bit of feedback and noticing in others when they need a bit of a break, very important.
Of course, this is a marathon, not a sprint, isn't it? So let's turn to this next issue, which I know is occupying the minds of many CEOs right now, is the issues around resilience and maintaining morale within your respective teams. You both are involved in very large organisations. Andy, in your case, of course, the police play a high-profile 24/7 role, and Susan, governments are obviously under pressure to respond to a very diverse set of needs while operating under a real sense of urgency right now. How are you managing the energy and resilience of your teams? What are some of the coping strategies you've established to ensure people feel supported through these challenging times? And how are they and others in essential services coping right now? Susan, perhaps first to you.
Thanks, Andrew. I think in terms of resilience, in the main, public servants love crises like this, and they really come to the fore when they know that the work that they're doing every day is actually helping make our communities safe for the future. So in terms of resilience, yes, as John said, we have a large proportion of our workforce, and certainly my portfolio, that is running on adrenaline and running to deliver what it is that Victoria Police and the state government need from us. But in saying that, I think that they wait and they love times like this. So for now, and for Victoria, we're probably only 3 to 4 weeks really into this, working from home arrangement and our level 3 restrictions. That's okay. But it'll be how much longer that we can go on doing that. So, for me, the resilience piece is around, recognizing and verbalizing and sharing that people feel different things at different times. There is a bit of a emotional roller coaster with this. It's the, not being able to see family and friends when you'd normally be able to see family and friends. It's not being able to do the things that you would ordinarily do, go to the gym, go out with a mate and have a beer or a wine on a Friday night, etc. And I think by verbalizing those things and sharing, that from my perspective, helps to comfort my team, and also helps them to feel that, they're supportive, and gives them permission to share that then with their other colleagues. Check-ins are very important. I'm finding that, the normal check-ins face-to-face, you can't pick up on people's emotions and their concerns and whether they're tired, etc., etc. So I'm finding that I'm listening far more intently when I'm having conversations with people to try and pick that up. And even we always say, ask people if they're okay, but really just significantly and seriously ask if people are okay, and checking in that way. Obviously, I'm keeping up my normal management meetings, my normal check-in schedules with my team, etc., etc. I'm broadcasting, more emails to my whole portfolio. Some of them are serious, some of them are more lighthearted. So trying to use all the different forms of communication that we possibly have available to us.
It's a good point about, people feeling that they can, express their emotions at this time. But one of the challenges I guess many people face is, well, everybody else is dealing with issues. So, I don't want to be a burden on them. Do you encourage, people to email? Because obviously writing can sometimes be easier than trying to do that in a verbal format, although, sometimes it is better to pick up the phone. What channels or what ways are you encouraging people to use to actually express some of those emotions?
I think one of the things that has come with this new paradigm of working is that we now have, multiple channels available to us where we didn't have before. So in Victoria Police, our primary tool is Microsoft. We have Microsoft Teams chat. So the check-in with teams in the morning, the schedule, let's have a coffee at a particular time and let's just sit and chat rather than talking about a business issue. I think that's very much helping. I'm encouraging people to get online in the morning, going, hey everyone, how are you going? This is what I did this morning. I actually got out for some exercise, or, I really couldn't get out of bed this morning. I'm feeling a bit down. So, and just encouraging those check-ins and, the ability to, be, I suppose, vulnerable to your team members means that they will then be vulnerable and reciprocate back. And in that way, you can start to pick up on how people are thinking and feeling, and putting other mechanisms in around them if they need it.
Thanks, Susan. Andy, how are you dealing with this in an organisation as large as the police, and have you sought to, perhaps establish some of your own back channels to make sure that you're looped in, because very difficult trying to, achieve this in an organisation as large as the New Zealand Police.
Yeah, look, absolutely. We've got quite a good organisational practice we use when we move into an operation mode, as we are at the moment. We'll stand up a welfare work stream, which has, our people sort of practitioners working in it, actively checking in across our workforce, ensuring safety, but also making sure that there are counselling services available, or just as you say, another channel to seek support where people need it. And that's a good insurance for us in the mix of a busy time. But I think it's really important to say, a crisis is not an excuse for poor leadership. And sometimes it's easy that we revert into this sort of command and control mode. But actually, when you're in the middle of a crisis, what you need is to step in on your leadership, to lean in, to be more attentive to how people are going, more focused on the human side rather than less. And that is so much about tone from the top. I'm using, because I'm early in the role, I'm in the first weeks, I'm using my messaging to the organisation to pick up on themes that are important for me in my tenure. One of which is how we are as an organisation, so how we are to each other, how we are to the people we deal with, and really who we are as an organisation. And those themes are so apt in the midst of a difficult situation like the one we're dealing with.
One of the challenges I imagine you face is, you've got people really wanting to go over and above at this time with the immediacy of what they're dealing with. So just trying to get them to sort of manage their energy levels so that they can get through the whole thing. I imagine that's a challenge as well too.
Okay, absolutely. And it's important. We can suffer from sort of a superhero complex where we think we need to do it all. No one here is irreplaceable, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. We all deserve a day off, and it's incumbent on us as leaders to set up routines and rhythms that enable everybody to get a break from their role. And when you're disrupted and you're working outside your normal reporting lines and so on, that just becomes all the more important that you're quite deliberate about that.
One area particularly, to get your thoughts on this idea of appreciation, because when you are demanding a lot of people at a time like in a crisis, how do you show your appreciation? You can't obviously do it to everybody individually, but how are you dealing with that particular issue, Susan?
I think that thank you are two of the most simplest words to say, and sometimes the most important words to say. And I think that in times like this, we can't overuse the words thank you. But in saying that, when you've said thank you 10 times a day and 20 times in a week, it can get it can start to fall on deaf ears. So one of the things that I've been doing is not only saying thank you to my whole portfolio, because the work that they've been doing has been amazing, but and at risk of not being able to call out everybody, but really verbalizing and acknowledging the really major achievements that we've had in a week. And some of those are absolutely significant. So, being also aware that I'm not under or overreaching on this, but also the fact that calling out people for the work that they do is really important. And I do also do that personally as well. Of course, ring those people where I'm able to actually say, look, that was a great piece of work and I really appreciate it. But it is very difficult to continue to say thank you over long periods of time, but that's what we need to do right now, and it will be a long period of time.
Andy, some of your approaches to showing appreciation?
Yeah, similar themes, I think, on the internal stuff. So where I'm having video conferences, just taking the time to notice a piece of work that somebody's done that's making a difference for us, and there's that opportunity every day. I've also got the opportunity doing media to acknowledge the work of our people, and that's a direct line to the front line, and it's public. So I'm doing my best every media interaction to boast really about what police is doing out there, and that's a channel that's always really well appreciated by our people.
And you might have one or two tuned into this this video session as well too. John, your thoughts around this area, resilience, morale boosting, and engagement and appreciation?
Yeah, look, I think that the behaviours that you exhibit as a leader, and there's some great examples from both Susan and Andy there. They give others permission. So if a leader is vulnerable and open about how the roller coaster they're going on, then that gives others permission. If the leader's truly taking a day off and is really demonstrably taking a day off, then it allows others to do so and sort of refresh. So I think that role modeling, what are the behaviours that you're wishing of others, and making sure that you're role modeling those yourself. This is a really tough area, because it's really hard to know how people truly are, and there will be some who will be very real open book and share where they're at, and there'll be others that are a little more private, and there'll be others that are a lot more private in terms of how they are. So having multiple mechanisms to engage people that suit them in a way, and draw out them, and whether that's having extra one-on-ones, formally or informally, and there will be, or whether it's through an anonymous pulse survey where they can sort of share where they're feeling but not be identified. Those can be some of the circuit breakers. But I'd say one thing, I would say there's one person in every team or every organisation that everyone goes to and truly shares how they feel. So really important to connect with that person and have their trust, because they'll have their finger on the pulse for sure.
Do you want to speak just very briefly too about maintaining leadership mojo, and obviously the the mojo throughout the organisation, taking the pulse of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's you don't know what you don't know, and so as a leader, having an evidence-based approach, and having a survey that allows you to understand where leaders are traveling well, because there's a lot of trust placed in the leaders, and there's a lot of leaders that sit between Susan and Andy and the front line. Really having that as a bit of a dashboard can be a pretty useful piece of information in terms of where to concentrate leadership energy, or where to provide the support that's needed.
Thank you to our live audience for your questions coming through. We'll get to your questions very shortly. If you'd like to pose a question, then feel free to send it through. Just in this final part of this forum, before we jump into some of those audience questions, let's talk briefly about whole of government, the whole of government approach, which has been taken in response to COVID-19, including private sector relationships, partnerships. What are some of the particular leadership challenges in being part of a multi-departmental, multi-sector effort? Because this is what I guess differentiates you from the private sector, where people can work in their individual silos largely. You have to work across silos, multiple engagements with other agencies and so forth. What are some of the challenges that that's throwing up for you, and I guess some of the opportunities that also perhaps come out of that environment? Andy, to you first.
Yeah, look, this is the ultimate sort of challenge for the public service, I think, when you're dealing with something that requires you to operationalise urgently across different pieces of work. It is challenging. You find that Wellington, or the capital, is often set up to do policy advice, which is slow and deliberate, but not necessarily to operationalise across agencies. Here we've had a cross-agency operational coordination centre established, which looks at work streams that cross-cut. That has enabled us to cut through some of the silos we would otherwise have. But probably the most important thing, I believe, is the relationships that exist from BAU time that you can leverage in the time of crisis. And we're fortunate Wellington's a very small place, and a lot of people know a lot of other people, and you can join things up that otherwise would be quite difficult in a system sense. So it's not easy, but what I'm seeing, we're making it work in a pretty challenging time.
Susan, what have you learned or discovered through this crisis in terms of dealing with in a multi-agency environment?
Very similar to Andrew, and certainly, you know, the traditional way in which we develop public policy, which is slow and considerate and collaborative. What I'm finding is that, you know, this is now a move fast public policy perspective. So, you know, we may have 24 or 48 hours to come up with a public policy solution on issues, which is not, you know, doesn't tend to be our normal way of working. So the moving fast piece. I think the other piece is, you know, the communication chains. So where something might be agreed, you know, at the most senior parts of our organisations across government, it takes time to filter down to those that actually have to operationalise those decisions. And that timing gap can be problematic when you've only got 24 or 48 hours to try and work through something. And then, of course, as soon as you get too many, you know, multiple agencies involved, sometimes you can just have the too many cooks issue. But like Andy said, the networks and the connections and the communications are absolutely critical. So, you know, relying on those networks, reaching out to those networks, and, you know, in my case, reaching out to those that may have an interest in what we need to do. And when I say reach out, that's not by email, because we're all getting slammed with email at present. That is actually ringing people and making those that contact and those connections. And then I think the third thing is actually being very clear about what it is that we're trying to achieve, because different agencies will have different priorities. So what police is trying to achieve may not be what health's trying to achieve, or it may not be what Premier and Cabinet are trying to achieve. So really having, you know, being very clear up front so that we can all, you know, work together to a common goal versus, you know, three different priorities, and try and find that commonality and those connections.
Andy, what about the opportunities that come from a crisis, I guess, to perhaps experiment with ideas, to do things in an environment that you perhaps might not be able to do in a business as usual environment? What has been some of your approaches to perhaps, you know, innovation within a crisis paradigm?
We've really been trying to bring a strategic mindset to our tactical operations. So what I mean by that is, there's a lot of things we have to do now in the crisis to work differently. The trick is, where do we want to land at the end of it? And what are the good things that we can bank about just different ways of working? So a couple of examples. One, obviously, is the move towards working remotely, to using technology. We could be much better connected across the country if we leverage this technology in a BAU sense. This is forcing us to learn it. Another one is about how we deal with people out there who commit offences. At the moment, it's not practical to put everyone through a cell block and put them through the courts. Actually, probably in the normal mode of things, that's not always the best solution either. So the little ways of working that we innovate now, trying to work out how we carry those through into normal operation, and the crisis just gives you the lever, the platform, the opportunity to do something that you couldn't do normally.
Are you encouraging that approach? Obviously, within the operating environment that people have to work in with an organisation like the police, but are you encouraging frontline officers to think with that sort of mindset as well?
Yeah, we are. We have this mix of wanting to innovate but needing national consistency. So it probably is most apt for how we develop processes that the whole of the frontline uses that are different from what we've done before. But equally, our messaging to our people is about exercising their discretion differently. There's quite a strong imperative now to not bring a whole lot of people together in one place, and that includes police cell blocks. So they're needing to be quite creative about how they deal with what they find and trying to find better solutions.
And John, I mean, the old adage, you don't want to waste a good crisis, and there's not being sort of too flippant because this is obviously very serious times, but it does provide this opportunity to extend boundaries, to push things out, and particularly when an environment people are dealing with a non-structured environment that a crisis is that something that could be embraced more, do you think?
Look, I think the first thing is to acknowledge governments have moved at the speed of light, and it's amazing what can be achieved through the approach that's been taken. So, and a lot of it's around mindset, and that whole of government mindset and integration has unlocked a huge amount of potential and performance within the government sector. It'd be great to see that continue. I mean, ultimately, you know, the whole of government approach is like a team on a really grand scale. And like all teams, you know, they're bound by a shared commitment to a common purpose, and there's trusted relationships. And the trusted relationships in the BAU and pre-crisis have probably been leveraged and amplified, and new relationships and new levels of trust have been developed. So I think they could be potentially very enduring, you know, as we move forward, and very, very positive.
Right, let's take some questions in the remaining time. If you look back on your last few weeks, so what's the one leadership thing that you would have done differently if you'd had your time over again? The old hindsight question. Anything so far? Andy, you've got the luxury of only being in it a few days, so probably doesn't matter too much. But Susan, anything you'd do differently in the 2 weeks you've been, or 2 or 3 weeks you've been in the role so far? I'm sorry, the 2 or 3 weeks of the crisis that you've been in the role.
Yeah, that's always an interesting question and a tough question. I think the answers to that will come, you know, much further down the track than what we are now. But I think probably two observations I'd make, and one is, you know, my leadership approach to my team. And I think that what I would change is I would have communicated across my portfolio far more earlier and far more regularly. You know, you get caught up in that. The work and the delivery, and that can be all consuming, that you forget to project out. And I think that, you know, in hindsight, I would have liked to have projected out much earlier. I think the second learning and reminder for next time, and I'm sure that all of us will absolutely agree to this, is try not to let that routine that, you know, gets you out of bed in the morning, try not to let that drop. So, you know, the exercise drops away, the food goes bad, there's, you know, maybe more alcohol than what you would normally drink. You know, try and cease that early. And it's probably only been in the last week or so that I've gotten myself back into a better routine, and I feel much better for it.
Andy, in terms of that within the police context, have you begun to think about how you transition out of this environment, or would you actually like this environment that you're operating in at the moment from what you've seen in the few days you've been in the role so far? Do you feel that that's an environment you'd like to continue?
I don't think anyone wants to be, you know, dealing with this kind of crisis. Ultimately, it's not good for communities, and it's not long-term good for our people. But what I am doing is making sure that we're bringing in some of that longer term view, you know, whether it's just down to governance rhythms, bringing in that scanning out to what's happening next month, what's happening in 6 months, how does policing look different after this, and using the disruption of this time for me in a period of transition to go, okay, what will the new normal look like? So it's a real circuit breaker if you want to have a bit of a reset on your ways of working as a leadership, and that for me is an opportunity.
Fantastic. John, final thoughts from you, I guess, just in terms of some of the learnings from this environment that we may be taking forward into the future.
Yeah, certainly. It's an interesting question. You know, what we'd do differently in hindsight. I mean, one of the things I'd frame up in terms of the experience we've had over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So what are the things that we've done over the last 2 or 3 weeks that will actually transfer and remember and embed as we move forward? Because we've been really the collaboration and the innovation that's been happening at the speed of light, and it would be great to for us to be able to really learn and understand what that is, and we've been refining and reflecting in very short cycles. So I think there's a lot of positives that this pressure has brought on us, and a lot of different ways of working, different ways of thinking, and different perceptions of what's possible. And I think that's something that we'll take forward as a group.
Just before we wrap up, I understand you've actually surveyed around 100 senior leaders throughout New Zealand and Australia to keep an eye on the pulse of things. What are some of those early results showing?
Yeah, really interesting, because it's very similar themes have come through today. But what I'd say is that the key success factors of improving leadership effectiveness and productivity right now, from the voice of those who are reporting into us, is maintaining that messages around hope, guidance, and inspiration, communicating transparently and often, and certainly the focus on the welfare of people is critically important right now, and is driving engagement, and is driving productivity, and is driving the perception of leadership effectiveness. Leaders are engaged more than ever right now, more than in, if you like, peacetime. So, that'll be all hands to the pump will be driving that. So it'll be interesting to see over the coming weeks as we survey whether this is sustained. And around half have got a good mojo, but there's 20% of leaders who are operating on pretty low batteries. Not unusual, but the impact of that is amplified right now. So again, that'll be something to watch as we keep an eye on this over the coming weeks.
John, thanks. Very briefly, your best leadership tip that you'd be passing on from your experience either now or previously, or something you've learned about yourself, just very briefly, that we could share with our audience. Susan, anything comes to mind?
Oh, look, I think I'd say, remain to be yourself, share with people, the thoughts and feelings that that you're going through, because, in the end, they're probably going through exactly the same thing as well. And it gives them permission to recognize that and talk about it.
Thanks, Susan. John, yeah, let's take yours. What are you passing on?
Yeah, well, I mean, CEOs are people too. So, being really human and being who you are and confident in who you are is critically important, because that's enough. And really key focus on people. It's the people who are going to be driving how well organizations cope through this period and how strongly they come out the other side.
Andy, final word to you.
For me, increase your focus on leadership, don't decrease it. Be clear about what's important, devolve to leaders and enable them to deliver.
Excellent. That concludes our second ISL Leadership Forum. I'd like to thank our panelists, particularly for their time in very busy roles, and we really appreciate you giving up the time to share your insights today. Andy, Susan, and John, for sharing your insights and your valuable experience. Thank you, and also thanks to our audience, of course, for participating and for your questions. Now, this live stream will be edited into bite-sized chunks, available to view on the ISL website. That's www.leadership.ac.nz in the coming days. Now, if you'd like to continue the discussion, we didn't get to all the questions, unfortunately, and you've got other questions you'd like to raise, you can do so in upcoming leadership forums by joining the dedicated ISL Leader Forum LinkedIn group. Just search the ISL Leader Forum in the LinkedIn search bar. Make sure to select groups and then click on the ISL Leader Forum group and request to join. A reminder that our third forum with panelists from the large business sector, Downer New Zealand and Watercare, will be CEOs from both those organisations will be live streamed next Wednesday, the 15th at 11 a.m. I look forward to welcoming you all back for another informative half hour of insights and experience from leaders like you grappling with the challenges of these unique times. I'm Andrew Patterson on behalf of ISL. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again.